what is the latest with you? What has happened over the last 12 hours?
A lot has happened. I just want to correct one little thing. The Israeli army actually announced that aid is increasing massively, I think immediately to 70 trucks a day, and the plan is to bring it up to 100 trucks a day starting today.
Okay.
So I think the news about a trickle of aid, I mean, nothing is enough, but the news about a trickle of aid, I think, is a little bit
And
past.
when did they announce that, Noga? Is that this morning that they've
I
sort of
think
given that
that was,
glimmer of hope?
if I'm not mistaken, this is in the idea, the Israel Defense Forces spokesman statement of last night,
Okay,
which was, a statement made on Saturday night. Not a
sure.
lot of us were paying attention, and in Israel more so because the Prime Minister of Israel held his first press conference in many years, not just since
Mm.
the war started. First time he took questions from any Israeli journalist in years happened last night at about the same time.
Understood. Okay, well, we hope then to see aid, as you say, really stepping up through the day to day. So we'll keep an eye out for that. So that is a significant announcement. What of the fighting? Is that continuing, and in what capacity is that continuing?
The fighting is ongoing. I have to say that yesterday, Hamas, this terror group that rules Gaza, has been very loud in claiming that there are fuel shortages that threaten lives in Gaza. That said, Israel was under a constant barrage of rockets yesterday from the north in the Galilee to the south of the country. And so there is at least fuel in Gaza that is being used by Hamas to launch rockets. It's significant fuel. That happened yesterday. The Israeli army spokesman just had a briefing now. He said that Israel hit 450 Hamas targets during the course of the night. Very little information is getting out of Gaza right now because Israel cut off the internet lines, all communication lines, and they're I know that a BBC actually journalist was able to get some news out. I'm not quite sure how, but it's very difficult to get information. I don't have new information about casualties inside Gaza. And my understanding on the Israeli side is that most of these hits over the course of the night were from tanks stationed in Gaza, Israeli tanks.
In terms of the press conference by Netanyahu, which is an interesting observation actually from you, though this is his first one in actually a very long time, he really reinforced that message that has been repeated from the Israeli government over the last few weeks of moving to eradicate Hamas, of trying to free hostages. On that latter point, what can we say about the progress in terms of trying to free hostages? This seems like quite a circular discussion in that Hamas say they would do that with certain contexts and preconditions, but Israel are not going to sort of give in to those. I just wonder if there's any feeling of progress, Noga.
I can't tell you there's a feeling of progress, and I can tell you, if you're interested, that this press conference ended up going pretty badly for this prime minister.
Really?
So the reason I bring this up is, of course, it might not interest a British public to know what are Israel's internal political problems, but on the other hand, this is a war with major international implications. And I do think it's interesting maybe to understand why he's perceived as so weak. What may be actually impeding Israel in its arguments internationally? Among other things, I think that Netanyahu has very little credibility now. And that's what I'm trying to get across.
What do you, just in terms of that then, Noga, is there a suggestion or indication that it may not be Netanyahu who will lead Israel through the entirety of this conflict? Do you think there might be moves to replace him at some point?
I think there might. I mean, it's really hard to say. Israel hasn't been in a war of this magnitude in 50 years, and Israel hasn't suffered civilian losses like it suffered since October 7th in its history, ever. So we're really kind of treading on unknown ground. But yes, I mean, the last thing I saw, the last bit of news before I joined your program was a flat out attack by Benny Gantz. Benny Gantz is a former chief of staff of the Israeli army. He's an opposition politician. He's not an ally of Netanyahu. But because Netanyahu already had such terrible credibility when this war started, he felt the need to shore up his kind of military credentials with ex-military people. And he established a war cabinet to replace his normal cabinet just for the course of this war. Benny Gantz, the former chief of staff of the army, is the number one man. He's the guy basically reassuring Israelis these days that this war is in sane hands. And what has happened now is that Netanyahu issued 2 tweets over the course of the night, claiming that basically Israel's security chiefs had failed to warn him that a war was imminent, blaming the head of military intelligence by name, pointing at him. And so the last I saw just 10 minutes ago is that this man, Benny Gantz, on who I think almost all Israeli hopes are hung right now, just came out and said that the prime minister has to retract this attack on the Israeli security forces. Prime Minister of Israel attacking his own security chiefs during wartime, and the man who's come in to save him says he has to retract that statement and he's harming national resilience. So it's a very difficult situation here.
That is astonishing. Absolutely. And it speaks to the real tension within the leadership of the Israeli government right now. And so, yes, in terms of how steadfast support for Netanyahu remains, well, I suppose remains to be seen. What is the public view, Noga? We've spoken before about, I suppose, the context for this, the build-up to this over the last few months, the protests, the dissatisfaction. But traditionally, war is a time of unity where people back their leaders. Is there a sense, though, that that is not happening for Netanyahu?
It is absolutely not happening for Netanyahu. What has happened in Israel is a much more complicated phenomenon to describe, but society has come together in ways that are very impressive. Civil society has built up entire entities, emergency centers. The entire support structure for the families of hostages is being all run by volunteers, top lawyers in the country. A former Mossad chief under Netanyahu is now representing these families. So on the one hand, you see that there's zero trust in the government. And on the other hand, you do see the society has come together, sort of ignoring the government on its own in very impressive ways to support the war effort and to support the families. But Netanyahu started this war very unpopular, as you just mentioned. He regained power basically January 1st, December 29th, and he launched a single policy initiative, which was basically a judicial coup d'etat. Wow. This was extremely unpopular. This provoked unprecedented unrest and protest in Israel. He was extremely unpopular on October 6th. He had support under 30%. And then this war happened. And basically, since the war happened, Israelis have heard very little from him. And what they've heard from him now is that he's blaming Israel's security chiefs for the troubles. So I would say the situation here is volatile and fragile.